Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to poker tournament strategy. Now here's your host, Clayton Fletcher.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. I'm your host, Clayton Fletcher, here in New York City, where the snow is falling, and there's so much to talk about tonight. I was supposed to have a guest on the podcast this evening. Her name is Katie Stone. Some of you are probably familiar with Katie, a big star in the chess world who has made the transition into poker in the last 10 years or so, and she is now a sponsored professional with PokerStars New Jersey. The reason she's unable to join me is because she is playing the final table of a big live tournament at the Borgata, where first prize is $43,000. So we are all rooting for you, Katie, and of all the excuses anyone has ever made not to appear on the podcast with me, this one takes the cake. So on this episode, I want to get into, go back to our review of the World Series of Poker main event coverage that we've been watching together on ESPN, talk about some of the hands that have been played, and particularly focusing, we're at the end of day 7 now, so we're going to focus on the chip leader in the tournament and how to play a big stack in the late stages of a major live event. I have a lot of thoughts about that, and I want to get to them. But before we get back into our review of the ESPN coverage, I want to talk about something else that's going on in poker right now. There's a young man named Gordon Vayo. He's under fire right now. The whole story has not come out. So let's start off by saying, in fairness, okay, we haven't heard Gordon's side of the story. A lot of what's been released is the spokespeople for PokerStars telling only their side of the story. So it's entirely possible that things could come out quite differently than they appear right now. But assuming that does not happen, things don't look good for Gordon. Now, Gordon Vayo is a very, very accomplished tournament poker player. One of the November 9, I don't remember what year it was, but he did quite well in the main event, and he's had a lot of success online and live in the No Limit Hold'em poker tournament scene. Today, of course, we're not going to be talking about Gordon Vayo's tournament strategies and how talented he is at actually playing the game, but rather a lawsuit that he filed surrounding a victory that he had in an event that was part of the PokerStars Spring Championship of Online Poker, also known as SCOOP or Scoop. So he wins this Scoop event for almost $700,000, and then PokerStars doesn't pay him. PokerStars alleges that the reason he did not get the money that he won in that event was because he did not play the event legally. Gordon claimed at the time that he had participated in the event in Canada, where it's totally legal to play on PokerStars and any other online site that I know of. Actually, some of our TPE pros, notably Casey Jarzabek, the big dog, plays in Canada all the time, and it's not an issue. The issue comes from PokerStars discovering, or allegedly discovering, that Gordon Vayo was in fact not in Canada, although he claims that he was. So here's the thing, guys. If you want to try to circumvent the terms of service of a poker website, or any website for that matter, you have to know that big companies such as PokerStars have legal teams and have sophisticated security systems in place, and they will eventually find out that you were doing what you were doing. In this particular case, it's been alleged that Gordon was in the United States and using a VPN, which is technically way above my head, but it basically makes a website think that you are someplace that you are not. Virtual something network. I'm sure most of you listening know what VPN stands for. So, if one is in the US, but he wants to make it appear that he is in Canada, it's possible to do so using something called a VPN. However, when it comes to actually proving one's whereabouts, then receipts come into play. Did you drive into Canada? Do you have your receipt from the toll bridge that you crossed? Is there a stamp on your passport that says you went from the U.S. to Canada on that day? Do you have any evidence to support your claim that you were in Canada? Well, Gordon Vayo provided such evidence, and here's where it gets interesting. PokerStars alleges that Vayo hired a forger. They don't name the forger in the lawsuit, or at least in the documents that have been released thus far. Here in the United States, for those who are listening in other countries, court matters are presented as public documents in most cases. So anytime anyone in the United States wants to find out the information about a particular lawsuit here in this country, that is typically a matter of public record. So these court filings are something that we can just look up and see for ourselves. And that's why you see this all over Poker News and other websites that cover poker goings on. Anyway, according to some of these filings, a forger was hired by Vayo to help him make it appear that he had played this tournament in Canada. Now, I know people who live in the United States, have a second residence in Canada, have an address in Canada, have set up ways for them to be able to play in Scoop events or WCOOP events, or anytime they want to play online, but they actually have to go to Canada to do so. So these filings show that Vayo was not, in fact, in Canada at the time of the Scoop tournament he won, and that he hired this forger to make it look like he was. I've seen the documents, and if this is a forgery, it's a really bad one. Basically, there was Gordon Vayo, who lives in California, his California bank statement compared with the forged one. And now, again, this is evidence being presented by PokerStars. We don't have the whole story yet. There could be an explanation that escapes me right now as to why these documents are so similar. But if you just replace a few entries from Gordon Vayo's actual California bank account and then replace them with a few entries from a Canadian bank account, that's the forgery that's being alleged. Now, this matter is not yet settled. It's an ongoing court battle. Who knows how it all turns out. But as of this recording, November 14th, okay, PokerStars is countersuing Gordon Vayo. So Gordon had sued to try to get the money that he claims he won fair and square in Canada in the Scoop event in 2017. Almost $700,000. Now, to fight against paying him, PokerStars had to, assume legal costs and a number of other expenditures associated with fighting back against what they claim was basically a cheater. I mean, let's face it. If you're on a VPN pretending to be in Canada so that you can circumvent the Black Friday rule that says you can't play on PokerStars, you are cheating. I don't see any other way to describe it other than cheating. So if Vayo was doing that, PokerStars is within its rights to countersue for damages and court costs and lawyers' fees and a number of other monies that this allegedly frivolous lawsuit has caused PokerStars to incur. Now, right now, the damages being sought by PokerStars are at almost $300,000 and counting. So it's possible that Gordon Vayo took first place in a scoop event, and it will cost him, well, in his mind, $900,000. So, I mean, I don't know if it's right for me to be laughing about this, but yeah, you guys know how I feel about cheating. We talked about Will Kassouf in a previous episode and how he was stealing money from his own friend, which I found despicable. My general thoughts about cheating scandals as they relate to poker and poker players is it just kind of puts a black mark on all of our records unfairly, because most poker players that I know are honest and loyal and faithful people that you could actually trust with your last dime, because most of us care very deeply about our reputations, and we wouldn't do anything like this or what Will Kassouf did. Now, again, we don't know for a fact that Gordon Vayo is guilty. The court battle is ongoing, but with these documents that were released today, I feel that it doesn't look good for Gordon, and therefore it doesn't look good for any of us. Many poker players understandably have a very negative view of PokerStars based on certain things that have happened with that company in the last few years. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just visit any video made by Doug Polk in the last 3 years and you'll see what I'm talking about. And because of that, many of us would probably love to see PokerStars lose a court case against especially an American player such as Gordon Vayo for our own selfish reasons, and just watching a big company that's kind of done some questionable things to its players lately have to pay a price. I just don't think it appears that from what I've seen today that this case will be that victorious moment for you, me, or anyone else, because the evidence of forgery appears to be very strong evidence. With that said, though, I want to show a little bit of the other side. I feel for players who were making their living playing online on PokerStars. I myself was on Cake Poker at the time of Black Friday. I had pretty much forsaken PokerStars after a number of cheating scandals had come out in circa 2004. We're talking ancient history now, but that's my Black Friday history. At the time, it seemed like a very unfair decision by the U.S. government to suddenly take away everyone's right to play on an international gambling website, PokerStars, and Party Poker, and all of the other sites that were out there, Full Tilt, Ultimate Bet. They were all really big in 2006. That said, I don't think that we should take the law into our own hands. And so this is what I have a problem with about this story. If, again, it hasn't been proven yet, but if what looks to be true ends up being proven in the court, that Gordon Vayo actually tried to get around the laws, I think it's pretty despicable. And as I said, it puts a bad mark on all of us. So, look, guys, as we try to grow this game, we want to continue attracting more and more players. We want poker's image to be as a legitimate hobby or a legitimate game. I'm trying not to use the word sport, but let's just say it's not good for anyone when these kinds of stories come out. So let's get your thoughts on Gordon Vayo. Have you known anyone that used a VPN? Have you ever tried to make it look like you were in a certain place when you were in another place in order to allow yourself to do some gambling that you legally should not have been doing? I'm interested in your thoughts. You guys can tweet me at Clayton Comic. I love to hear from the listeners of the podcast and look forward to your thoughts on this story and other stories like it. And now, without further ado, let's get back to our coverage. We took a little break from some of this coverage as we've had some guests recently, and we've been talking about other hands from other tournaments. But I still want to continue talking about ESPN's coverage of the 2018 World Series of Poker. And the story, okay, so I busted out in 28th, and at the time when I busted, they went down to 27 players, which meant 3 tables left. Actually, someone else busted at the same time as I did, and so there were 26 players left, but you get the point. There are 3 tables left. At that moment, there was a prohibitive chip leader in the tournament by the name of Michael Dyer. And that's what I want to focus this episode's strategy on, is Michael Dyer having not just a chip lead, but, with 30 players left, he had something like 12% of the chips remaining in play. So he had something like 4 or 5 times the average stack, which is just huge at that point in the tournament with only three or 4 tables remaining to have that many chips. Many of us might not exactly know how to handle that situation, right? I mean, well, look, you have so many chips, you could just fold every hand for the next several hours and probably just coast your way to the final table and just lock up $1 million. That was the minimum payout at this year's final table, was over $1 million just for getting 9th place. So that would actually be reasonable if you told me that, look, with this many players left, I had so many chips, I just wanted to make sure that I got the $1 million. And that I can't really argue with that, because that is so much money to get all at once. I couldn't blame someone for feeling that way. I don't play that way myself, and maybe I'm too aggressive when I have a chip lead late in a tournament. I know what it's like to be a short stack towards the end of a tournament, especially a big one like this, when everyone is looking up at the pay jumps. What question have I gotten the most? When I finished in 28th, there was a big pay jump between 28th and 27th. And as I've done a number of interviews about my bust out, people ask me, well, did you ever consider trying to fold? There was a pay jump of $50,000 between 28th place and 27th place. Did you think it might have been a good idea just to hang on and try to, get that pay jump? And I think, of course, the answer is yes, there is value. There's exactly $50,000 worth of value in doing exactly that. So I don't blame players that see tournament poker that way. I just don't look at it that way. I'm not a big ICM guy, as most of you who have listened to other episodes have probably gathered. I'm not a big ICM guy. By that I mean, look, if we were down to 28 players and I knew that someone either at my table or one of the other remaining tables had less than 1 or 2 big blinds in his stack, then of course I would fold and get that pay jump. So I'm not stupid about ICM. It's something that you have to consider as part of an overall strategy. But you have to remember, guys, the real value in the main event in particular is winning it. So I didn't look at the pay jump between 28th and 27th as much as I looked at the pay jump between 28th and 1st. Because winning the main event, you go down in history, you get a lot of opportunities. Like I see John Sin is doing sponsorships, and he's being asked to be a bounty in this event, and they're paying him to do this charity thing, all because he won. So you have to look at the main event a little bit differently. But even in other tournaments where you don't get all of these tertiary benefits of being the quote-unquote world champion, I think it's important to realize that most of the money goes to first place. And wherever possible, you should take advantage of the fact that other people are so worried about trying to get each and every pay jump. You could probably bully some of those players out of good decisions. And anytime you can leverage someone else's emotions, which includes his desire to win another $50,000, for example, you should. because when players are using emotion instead of logic and reasoning and just good, solid strategy, you have an advantage over them if you're not using your emotions as your guide. So getting back to Michael Dyer, our prohibitive favorite to win the tournament with, anywhere from 30 players left down to where we're going to begin our coverage today when there were only 2 tables left. In fact, only 14 players left in the entire tournament. I think he puts on a clinic here as far as how hard to press on the gas and put pressure on my opponent, and how when my opponent tells me he's willing to fight, how to back off and stop fighting. I think this is a very important late game concept as we approach the final table, as we approach these big pay jumps at the end of a huge event like the main. You have to know that there's a difference between being a big stack and using your leverage that you have as a result of that big stack and just spewing off all your chips. And we've seen over the years some memorable meltdowns and blow-ups where big stacks have just gone into the sewer because players made bad decisions. And we need to know where the right balance is. As in all things poker, there's a balance that we've got to try to find. And I learned a lot from watching Michael Dyer. So I want to start with a hand that he played. I love these kind of hands, small blind versus big blind. There are 7 players at his table. There are 14 players left in the tournament. At this time, Michael Dyer in the small blind has 88 million chips, and the average stack was around 14 million. So to say that he was killing it would be an understatement. This guy had 22% of all the chips in play, more than 1/5 of the chips in play with 14 players left. And in this hand, the player with the second largest stack in the tournament was in the big blind with 33 million. So that lets you know exactly how big this stack was. An Australian player, I'm sorry that I forgot his first name, but his last name is Linsky, is in the big blind. And so here we have the top 2 chip leaders out of the 14 remaining players, and they're in the blinds. Everyone folds to Michael Dyer. Now, his table image has been what you might expect, an aggressive, big stack bully kind of chip leader, putting pressure on everybody, knowing that everybody was trying to make the final table, knowing that players are thinking about pay jumps instead of winning. He's been taking advantage of that. In this hand, he has the 4-3 offsuit in the small blind, and he completes for 200K. So it's 200 and 400 with a 50 ante. So let's talk about this. Some players never limp in the small blind, and I think that having a limping strategy is important. If everyone folds to me in the small blind, I'm going to have some hands, not many, but some hands that I'm just going to fold. And this would be just unplayable garbage, like 10 tray, Jack 4. I think it's okay if you're afraid that your opponent is going to call your raise a lot, and you're also afraid that he could raise because he'll just see the limp as weakness. If you feel like he's going to be exploiting you too much, then just by all means resist the great pot odds that you're being offered. In this situation, he's getting something like 4-1 on a call with the blinds and antes and everything. I think it's fine to just throw hands like 10-4, Jack 4, 10 deuce away, rather than calling and then having to fold when your aggressive opponent raises too often. Even if he doesn't raise, like, what are you hoping to flop with 10 deuce? You know what I mean? So I'm fine with throwing some hands away. I wouldn't include 4 tray, by the way. I think this hand is a little too playable. Dyer can afford to call with this hand. And then if Linsky raises, it's Alex Linsky. I just remember the Australian pro's name. Alex Linsky. If he raises, I have options with my 4-tray. I mean, look at these stacks we have. The big blind is 400. I have 88 million. My opponent has 33 million. If he wants to play a pot, we can do things. We can call a modest raise and hope to flop a straight draw or an unexpected big hand of some kind, or just flop a bluffable flop and try to outplay him. In other words, you don't have to auto fold just because it goes limp raise, small blind, big blind. With this hand, I'm okay with opening for a limp or opening for a raise. So Dyer open limps from the small blind, and Linsky checks, and we see a flop. I'm not going to reveal Linsky's hand yet. I know some of you probably haven't watched the coverage, and I don't want to reveal what Michael Dyer is up against. I like us to play this hand through from his perspective, if that's all right. So the flop comes 10, 9, deuce, rainbow. We missed completely. Maybe an ace on the turn would give us a gut shot. A 5 on the turn would give us an open-ender. So we have some very, very remote backdoor possibilities. But ultimately, we are at the bottom of our range. And in fact, we flopped the nut low. 4-3 is the worst possible hand right now. Therefore, Dyer chooses to take a stab at this pot. Now, he's been doing this a lot. He's been stabbing at any pot that appears to be available since he got the chip lead yesterday. And it's been working out for him, obviously, or he wouldn't have 22% of the chips in play with 14 players left. So he leads for 425. I love this sizing. At the time, there was just about $1 million in the pot. So he's giving himself a good price to hopefully take it down with this little bet, just over the minimum bet of 400K. He bets 425, and Linsky calls. Now let's try to put Alex Linsky on a range. I mean, obviously we know our 4 high isn't good, right? So we've got a call, which means he could have a 10, he could have a 9, he could have a deuce. Remember, Linsky didn't raise pre-flop, so he got to see the flop for free. It's even possible he's floating with garbage here, knowing that it's a blind versus blind situation. And also, in Linsky's shoes, I'd be thinking, Dyer shouldn't want to mess with me. There are so many much, much smaller stacks at the table for him to be picking on. The fact that he's betting now means he probably has something. Of course, we the viewers know that he has nothing, but I think in Linsky's shoes, the thought would cross my mind that Dyer probably isn't betting with air as often as he would against one of the smaller stacks, right? Typical tournament strategy is, why go to battle against another big stack when there are shorter... Actually, the best stacks to pick on are medium stacks. The ones that don't feel desperate, like we need to shove with any piece, but that don't that aren't big enough to really do damage in the event that we get involved somehow in a big pot. So Linsky makes the call, and now we have to try to range him. I know what he had, so I'm not going to get too into it. But let's just say he could have a lot of hands. His call doesn't necessarily mean that Dyer should give up. The turn is the king of clubs. So now our board is 10-9 deuce on the flop and a king of clubs on the turn. By the way, the deuce on the flop was also a club, so for what it's worth, a backdoor flush draw has just appeared. In Dyer's shoes with the 4 high, and knowing that I can't possibly win this hand unless I bluff, I still think I wouldn't bluff. I feel like I took my stab on the flop. Linsky says he has something. He's got a big stack. I have a big stack. There's no reason to keep putting pressure on him. But let's look at the case for doing so. It's possible that Linsky had something like a pair of 9s on the flop, right? He could have any 2 cards, really. And it's possible that he just called on the flop with second pair. Well, how much does he like this king? If he does have something like a modest 1 pair type hand, like a pair of 9s or even a deuce, it's very unlikely he can handle a ton of pressure. So this could be a bet situation for Dyer. Having played passively pre-flop, now turning on the engines, firing up the engines and trying to get him to fold whatever he's saying he has is a winning strategy. But I'm not sure that I would employ that strategy here, mostly because Linsky has probably noticed that I've been very, very, very aggressive of late, and it's unlikely he's going to give me credit for being able to beat a pair of nines. And I just think it's too likely that this bet will get called. So I'm not a fan of the bet, but I definitely see the logic behind it. Anyway, Dyer puts out $1.2 million into the pot of $2 million. So he has the nut low. He knows he can't win without betting. So GTO would suggest that this is the kind of hand we should put into our bluffing range. You want to be balanced. Dyer would like to have some bluffs here for those times when he actually flopped two pair or turned to king after having stabbed at the flop, and any number of value hands that would bet this amount. Using your worst hands as bluffs is not a bad strategy. So that's the argument. That's another part of the argument for betting again. I don't know. I mean, this board is getting ugly. There versus a range that is literally any two cards, betting the flop is fine. But I think once you get called, you have to know when to ease up. Dyer is putting the pressure on Linsky here, and Linsky tanks for a while and makes the call. So now we have a big pot. Let's see. The pot is now $4.4 million, and the river card is the Jack of Spades. So no flush came in, but anyone with a queen has a straight, and anyone who was hanging on tight with something like 9-6 is going to be very hard pressed to call another bet. So whereas I probably would not have bet the turn, if you'd force me to bet the turn, I think I would absolutely have to fire this river. It's just too good of a bluff card. It's too hard for Linsky to call, assuming he has something like a pair of nines, which is a reasonable hand to put him on after he's called twice. Dyer fires $2.6 million into the $4.4 million pot. So it's a healthy bet, a little over half the pot. Linsky is being offered almost 3-1 on a call. I'm now going to reveal Linsky's holding in this hand so that we can play together from his perspective. He's got the 10 of hearts and the 8 of clubs. So on the flop, he made top pair, which turned into second pair on the turn, and is now third pair on the river. So the question is, will I be able to call and win often enough to show a profit? Getting about 3-1, we need to be good about 25% of the time. So the question is Dyer bluffing more often than that? Or value betting worse, even more often than that? So I think it's really, really close. And typically, when I'm faced with a decision that I feel is really, really close, I tend to give action. In this case, if I'm Alex Linsky, I would probably fold because, unless I had a read that Dyer was bluffing or something. I know I have a pair of tens. It was a great flop for my hand. Things have gotten uglier and uglier. And again, I'm the other chip leader. It's unlikely that my opponent is trying to bully someone who has an unbullyable stack, such as mine. So therefore, I think in Linsky's shoes, I would probably have just folded my 10-8 and then been angry when I saw it on TV. Now, as you know, they don't show every single hand on the ESPN coverage. So in this spot, who knows exactly how much of a bully Dyer had been. I know that from the hands they did show and from what I saw on Poker Go from that table, it appeared that everyone was having to bow down to Michael Dyer quite often. So perhaps that went into Linsky's decision when he opted to call. I think Linsky just said, I've had enough. It's a blind versus blind situation. My pair of tens will be good often enough to win. And in this particular case, he was right. So that was, to me, a very interesting hand for both players. Dyer's decision to limp in pre-flop. His stab on the flop is pretty uncontroversial, but for him to continue with the hand on both the turn and river against the second chip leader when he was the big stack shows a lot of heart, and also shows another way to approach being a big stack late in a big tournament. Oh, by the way, guys, I love when you tweet at Clayton Comic and tag Tournament Poker Edge as well. I love when you guys disagree with things that I say. I don't pretend to be the best poker player in the world. I'm just the best stand-up comedian who also plays poker. The best poker playing comedian. I think I can claim that title maybe. But I will always have a lot to learn about this great game. And I love when people present alternate points of view. So if I ever say something on this podcast that you take issue with and want to let me know how you feel, believe me, I'll always be respectful as long as you are. Let me know what you think. Let's get the dialogue going about some of these hands. I can see many of you disagreeing with my opinions about this particular blind versus blind spot. Let me know. Would you be able to call with just a pair of tens in that situation? I'd love to know what all of you think. So let's move on. About 30 or 40 minutes later, we're still at that 200, 400 level with the 50 ante, and there's still 14 players left in the tournament. Dyer has continued his relentless aggression. He did not let that hand where he lost with 4 high slow him down at all. He's kept his foot on the gas. And here at a 7-handed table, he opens from the hijack with pocket deuces. He's got 87 million behind. So he lost that pot before, but obviously he won back a few chips. Full to the button. And a player that I had the misfortune of being seated with because he's so good. His name is Martin Garrits, and I hope that I pronounced his name correctly. I believe he's from Holland. He's an excellent and extremely aggressive player who doesn't seem to have much fear of losing at all. He 3-bets to 2.4 million. Now, I want to play this hand again from the perspective of Michael Dyer. And Garrett's having 3-bet on the button at this 7-handed table is now putting the pressure back on me with my pocket deuces. And I would say this pressure is further intensified by the fact that Garrett's, now let's do the numbers real quick. Dyer with 87 million behind opens to 800K with deuces. Garrett's 3-bets. I'm not going to reveal his hand just yet. And he's got only 18.5 million to start the hand. So, I would say his M is 20. You can say he's got in the neighborhood of 45 big blinds, however you want to view it. He's not exactly a big stack, and now that he's 3-bet to 2.4 million of his 18.5 million, he's put in, I would say, a considerable portion of his stack and really sending a message that he has picked up a hand with which to do battle. Folded all the way back to Dyer, and now we have a decision. Costs us 1.8 million to call, and I'm sorry, 1.6 million to call rather, and we're pretty much going to be set mining here. So I don't know. we've got about, the implied odds is what you want to look at when you choose whether or not to set mine. And in this situation, with Garrett's having put in 2.4, he's only got 16 million behind. It's basically a 10-to-1 ratio of what I have to call and what I can win additional in Garrett's stack. I think it's totally fine to fold this hand. I also think it might be okay to 3-bet. I should say 4-bet in Dyer's shoes. Really find out if Garrett's is just taking a stand on the button or whether he has a hand. When you do that, obviously the plan is to fold to a shove. You're not going to put in 18 million with deuces, but I think it's defensible to say, 6 million from here. You don't really need to make a huge re-raise because Garrett's is so short stacked compared to the pre-flop action. Dyer calls, and I think it's questionable to do so. Certainly defensible, but I would prefer Garrett's have in the neighborhood of 30 million behind, were I to make this speculative, let's hope we hit a deuce call. So the flop comes ace, 9, 4, rainbow. So not what Michael Dyer was hoping to see. The pot is 5.75 million. And Dyer needs to try to figure out what Garrett's 3-betting range looks like. And this is the problem with being out of position. Here's the way I look at it. If I make this call of 1.6 million more with my deuces, I can't only rely on hitting a deuce to win a pot. In other words, because I'm only getting 10-to-1 implied odds, I'm going to need to... There will be times when I hit my deuce and don't bust my opponent. So that doesn't really justify the call. So to make up for that fact and the fact that he's so short, I also need to win the pot sometimes when I don't hit a deuce. So is this a flop that we should stab at? I don't know. If we think Garrett's 3-betting range is only big pairs and ace-king, then maybe, yeah, leading into him or going for a check raise on this flop is a winning strategy because he doesn't have that many hands that actually like the flop, although he's likely to c-bet most of those hands on the flop. So Dyer plays in flow, checks to the raiser or to the player who re-raised him pre-flop, and Garrett's checks behind. So the question now is, does he do that with big hands like ace-king, any of the sets? Does he do that with pocket kings that won't fold no matter what we do? I think Garrett's check shows that he has something, but that maybe he does not want to play for all of his stack. In other words, I think he has a somewhat capped range, save for perhaps the very, very top being the nuts pocket aces. So Dyer checks, and when Garrett checks behind, we see a turn card, which is the King of Hearts. So this is a bad card for Dyer because some of the hands that Garrett's would choose as part of his pre-flop 3-betting strategy love this king. Pocket kings comes to mind. King, queen suited, king, jack suited even. At a 7-handed table against a very aggressive player, I could see Garrett's going to war with a lot of hands that includes a king. So if he didn't outflop us, he may have just outturned us, and I think that Dyer should shut it down now. He bets 1.85 million into the 5.75 million pot. Dyer does. So the flop went check, check, and now Dyer takes a shot at this pot. The only thing I like about this bet is the sizing. I believe that Dyer got a little bit frisky here. Certainly if Garrett's has pocket jacks, pocket tens, even pocket queens, he's probably going to fold. But, save for those 3-betting hands, and maybe when Garrett's was pre-flop bluffing with something like, 8-7 of hearts or whatever, this bet is just not going to get through very often. What I like about the sizing is it doesn't need to get through very often in order to show a profit. He's only betting a little bit less than 1/3 of the pot. So it might be reasonable to think that we can win that often and show a profit. Still, I wouldn't have done it. I would have saved those chips and pretty much given up on this hand, given the board. Garrett's calls, and now we have to give up, right? I mean, he's either got an ace or a king. He's not calling with too many worse hands, and he's also not folding those hands if we fire again on the river. The river comes the 5 of diamonds for a final board of ace, 9, 4, king, 5, and there's no possible flush. And Dyer checks dutifully, and Garrett checks behind and wins the hand with ace of diamonds, 6 of hearts. So obviously Garrett had about enough of Dyer's antics and chose the ace-6 off to 3-bet. The problem with choosing this hand to put into your 3-betting range is that even when you flop an ace, you end up playing the hand very cautiously and not maximizing your win potential. You see, Garrett was afraid to bet the river with top pair, even though Dyer probably has some worse hands to call with, because he's worried he could be outkicked. He's just worried. Ace-6 is probably not the best hand to 3-bet pre-flop, but I definitely see why Garrett chose to do so. Because look, guys, you can't just let the big bully, big stack chip leader keep beating up your table. Garrett said, look, I have an ace on the button against a guy who's been opening almost every pot for the last 2 days. It's time to take a stand. I think he should have been more patient, picked a better hand, but it's certainly a defensible play. The problem, though, is that even when you flop an ace, you don't love your hand enough to bet it on the river and try to make a little bit more money. Maybe for fear of getting check raise bluffed. And, that for all those reasons, I probably just wouldn't have played the hand in Garrett's shoes. But as it turns out, he wins a pretty substantial pot for his stack size. And I'm sure he was very happy with the result. Now, I want to do one more, guys, because it's the very next hand. So, in this hand, Dyer is in second position. So, whereas before he was in the hijack, which is third position, or under the gun +2, now he's under the gun +1. Remember, we're only at a 7-handed table. And Dyer is now sitting on 82 million. And he's holding the Queen 9 offsuit. Now, here's where I need to give this guy a lot of respect. He's gotten beaten up a few times. Both of these hands that we've discussed already, Michael Dyer lost. But he was able to see the situation for what it is. Nothing has changed. Despite losing these hands, I'm still the prohibitive favorite to win the tournament. I have so many chips compared to the average, and I have way more chips than most of the guys at my particular table. So with that in mind, he chose to literally open any remotely playable hand from any position at this table. And I respect it, because I don't know if I would have gotten a bit gun shy, chinks in the armor kind of thing. Like, do I really want to keep losing these chips little by little as we approach the final table? I think that most of poker is evaluating the ratio between risk and reward. And in this particular spot, Michael Dyer said, look, these guys need hands to come after me. So they're probably not going to want to play a big pot against me. They see that I'm willing to keep firing. And when you do that, it just makes you much, much harder to defend. So he opens from second position with the Queen 9, makes it 800, which is just the minimum bet. That's all you need to do at this stage of the tournament. Any raise is substantial. And he gets a call from a player named Rich Zhu. Now, Rich Zhu is actually the player who ended up taking the last of my chips in this tournament. So I try not to think about that as I watch him play. I hope you lose. I don't do that. He's in the small blind. I don't want to reveal his hand yet, but I will say he has 13 million in chips. So Rich is sitting there with only 13 million. His M is around 14. He's got, what do you want to do? 20, what is that, about 32 big blinds? So he's not exactly a big stack himself. And Rich Zhu actually has a below average stack in this situation. So now one thing that I've learned, especially in live tournaments, is that when a player flats with a medium short stack from out of the small blind, it's never a marginal hand. I shouldn't say never, but it's very seldom a marginal hand. It's usually a strong hand, maybe even a very, very strong hand, because a lot of players like to trap with this stack size, with that M of around 13 and 14, hoping to get some action from the big blind, maybe doing this with pocket aces, pocket kings. It's kind of reasonable, decent spot to slow play, given your aggressive opponent and your stack size situation. Remember, guys, positional disadvantage doesn't come as into play when we end up all in. So if he has a stack that could easily end up all in, say, for example, with a big check raise on the flop and then a bet on the turn, he's going to be all in. So who cares that he had to go first on the flop? It makes less of a difference. So the positional disadvantage is much more of a factor when we're deep stacked. The shorter you are, the less that actually matters. I don't want to reveal his hand, but I would just say that in Michael Dyer's shoes, I would put Rich Zhu on a pretty big hand, anywhere from a pretty big to a monster hand. And the big blind folds, and now we see a flop of 7, 6, 5, rainbow. Remember, we're holding the queen 9, so we have 2 overcards and a gut shot to a 9 high straight. Zhu, remember, was a small blind, so he's first to act and checks. Now, I think he's going to check all of his hands here. I think he should be checking his entire range on this board. And then be looking to put in, when he has a big pair, like I said, I thought his range could include something like pocket aces. I think check raising and going with it is perfectly fine, despite the draw-heavy nature of the board, 7-6-5. I just think that Dyer is going to go ballistic with a lot of his pair and straight draw combos. Hands like 8-6, 8-7, even 5-4 would probably rightfully assume that he has a lot of equity versus our small blind calling range, and go crazy with such hands. And so therefore I think when Zhu has a big pair like that, he should be check raising and looking to play for all of his chips. If you got me beat, good for you. I didn't call with a monster out of the small blind with an M of 14 to just fold. I didn't do that. I don't do that. So Dyer bets 725 into the 2.3 million pot, which is a very, very small bet, really designed to just get Zhu to fold his worst hands. And to Dyer's dismay, Zhu calls. But this situation isn't as bad for Dyer as it may appear. He will pick up a straight on the turn sometimes, so he can make a straight with an 8. He can also pick up a good bluff card, something like a king maybe would be a good card for him to bluff sometimes. An ace might be a bluff card for Dyer. So all is not lost, even when we get called on this flop. Obviously, a queen or a 9 would probably give Dyer the best hand if he doesn't have it already, which I think he almost never does. Again, I look at that to me, that small blind call with that stack size would set off some alarm bells, like this guy has a hand. So, again, I haven't told you what Zhu is playing with. I've done that by design. The turn is the ace of hearts. So Zhu had called 725 on the flop, and now there's 3.8 million in the pot, and the ace peels off. So we must ask ourselves, so Zhu checks, and Dyer has to ask himself, do I have more aces in my range than my opponent does? Is it worth betting again here on the turn? how many ace-high hands gave me action on the flop? And I think the answer is a lot of them, because our sizing on the flop was so small. Had Dyer bet closer to half pot or even a little bit bigger, I think we get hands like ace-jack, etc., to fold, just because we're starting to threaten the stack. And he only has ace-high. And it's a 7-6-5 flop, one that most players would be afraid of. So I think when we bet that small, it's harder to define our opponent's hand. So when Zhu checks and Dyer checks behind, I understand. Dyer's essentially giving up on this hand. And this is such an important concept when you're playing a big stack, when you're trying to be the chip leader bully. You have to know when to shut it down. And I think that having been called on the flop when I took my little stab, well, actually my first stab was pre-flop. Probably a lot of these hands were going raise and take it for Dyer. This one got to the small blind where he encountered resistance. Took a little stab on the flop. Zhu says he has something. Now, Zhu, by the way, is a California guy in a members-only jacket, somewhere around 50 years of age, and it kind of has a reputation for being a little sticky. So I don't blame Dyer for shutting it down at all. The river comes the king of hearts for a final board of 7, 6, 5, ace, king with 3 hearts. Zhu checks, and Dyer gives up, checks behind. It could be a spot to bluff. I have the nut flush blocker with my queen of hearts. That's a pretty small minor consideration considering it came backdoor. But I do have that blocker. I don't know. I think I really like Dyer's decision to check behind here. And Zhu wins with ace-10 offsuit. One of the worst hands I think he'll have when he flats from the small blind. I think it's pretty much the bottom of his pre-flop calling range. It's right around ace-9, ace-10 offsuit. So nice play by Dyer not to lose any more chips bluffing into this guy. Obviously, he's not going anywhere. One more, real quick. 2 hands later, actually more than 2. It was 1, 2, 3, 4 hands later. Dyer is now on the button. He opens. I folded to him on the button, and he's got 82 million behind. He opens to 800,000 with the 8-6 of hearts. Our good friend Alex Linsky is in the small blind on our immediate left and 3 bets to 3.2 million. So the opening bet to 800 and now the 3 bet to 3.2 million out of the small blind. And the Aussie has plenty of chips. He's got over 40 million. We have 82 million. He's got 40 million. We are 2 of the biggest stacks left in the tournament. Obviously, Dyer's still the chip leader in the tournament, and it's not even close. Dyer chooses to fold the suited 8-6 here versus the 3 bet from Alex Linsky in the small blind, getting 2-1 on a call with what most of us would view as a fairly playable hand deep stacked, and having the button. I think many of us would call 2.4 million to see a flop with this hand. And I really love Dyer's decision to fold it. You know, Alex Linsky had 3 bet earlier to a much smaller amount, which may have entered into our decision. Also, just why? You know, what happens if I flop a top pair of 8s and it's no good, and then I end up losing a bunch of chips because I got stubborn with top pair when my opponent had told me pre-flop he had a big hand? I'm going to now reveal that Alex Linsky had pocket aces, which really makes this fold look good. Even though 8-6 of hearts is not a bad hand to take up against pocket aces, you got to consider the overall situation. 14 players left in the main event. I've got this big stack. I don't have to get involved in every single hand. There's nothing wrong with raising from the button and then folding to the 3 bet, especially at a table where I haven't been encountering that much resistance. A little bit here, a little bit there, but for the most part, Michael Dyer's been having his way with this table. So I like his decision to fold and not get involved in a difficult situation against a pre-flop 3-bet from another big stack. So that's going to do it for this episode, guys. We don't get to see what happens throughout this episode. We've been talking about the main event with 14 players left. Maybe in an upcoming episode soon, we can get down to that final table and talk about how players ended up making the final table, something most of us will only ever dream of doing. Although I've come fairly close a few times, in the big picture, I haven't really come that close at all. So guys, thanks so much for listening. Please, please, please give us a rating on iTunes if that's where you listen, Stitcher, Podbean. We love comments. We love follows. We love retweets. And I love interacting on Twitter at Clayton Comic, at ClaytonComic on Twitter, and look forward to hearing from all of you in the coming weeks. So for everyone here at Tournament Poker Edge, thank you all so much for listening. I'm Clayton Fletcher.
In Texas, please fold them, let them hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Luck and intuition, play the cards with babes to start. And after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Can't read mine, no, she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Can't read mine, no, she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. I wanna roll with her, a hard pair we will be. While little gambling is fun when you're with me. I love it. Russian roulette is not the same without a gun. And baby, when it's love, if it's not rough, it isn't fun. Oh, whoa.